Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo, starting with Part 2, Book the Second, Chapter 9, Chapter 11, Chapter 9, Chapter 11. I looked it up right before too. Chapter 11. But reading updates. I read and finished volume 5 of Tokyo Ghoul. That wasn't a freeze. That was just me not remembering the name. Volume 5 of Tokyo Ghoul. Enjoying it. Again, it's something that I've already watched on anime, so it is like I already know the story, but it's just wonderful. It's wonderful. Recommend. And that's all I'm reading. So recap what happened last time. It was mostly just talking about the relationship between Gwynplaine, who was the child with the scars, and Dea, who was the little girl who is blind. And it was just talking about their relationship. They grew up together with Ursus in his van, and they are now traveling around and doing performance things. There's a lot of commentary on, of course, there's a lot of commentary on like forgetting your sadness and like coming to these shows, and that these shows are only worth a penny, and so like only the people who are poor are able to go and do go, and talk about like war torn people, literally war torn, but then also like what it does to your mental and everything else abilities and capacity and everything. Let's see. We also have, I'm trying to think of like what else was mentioned. We talked about like marriage between the two, and Dea is like, well, aren't we like already married? But they're not really already married. Ursus wants them to be married. I don't know. And Gwynplaine is talking about how even if he had the ability to like get his face back to the way that it was before, he wouldn't do that because that would mean that he is no longer in the same like outcast world that Dea is, and he loves that. And also he loves that he is able to, well, loves. He likes that he's able to help people forget their troubles, because when they look at him, they laugh, even though that is, you know, troublesome and weird. But I think that's like the high point gist of everything. I think. So we are on part 2, book the second, chapter 11. We're 40%, 46% of the way through. Here we go. Chapter 11. Gwynplaine thinks justice, and Ursus talks truth. A philosopher is a spy. Ursus, a watcher of dreams, studied his pupil. Our monologues leave on our brows a faint reflection, distinguishable to the eye of the physiognomist. Hence, what occurred to Gwynplaine did not escape Ursus. One day, as Gwynplaine was meditating, Ursus pulled him by his jacket and exclaimed, "You strike me as being an observer. You fool! Take care. It is no business of yours. You have one thing to do, to love Dea, and you have two causes of happiness. The first is that the crowd sees your muzzle. The second is that Dea does not. You have no right to the happiness you possess, for no woman who saw your mouth would consent to your kiss, and that mouth which has made your fortune, and that face which has given you riches, are not your own. You were not born with that countenance. It was borrowed from the grimace which is at the bottom of the infinite. You have stolen your mask from the devil. You are hideous. Be satisfied with having drawn that prize in the lottery. There are, in this world, and a very good thing too, the happy by right and the happy by luck. You are happy by luck. You are in a cave wherein a star is enclosed. The poor star belongs to you. Do not seek to leave the cave and guard your star, O spider. You have in your web the carbuncle, Venus. Do me the favor to be satisfied. I see your dreams are troubled. It is idiotic of you. Listen. I am going to speak to you in the language of true poetry. Let Dea eat beefsteaks and mutton chops, and in 6 months she will be as strong as a Turk. Marry her immediately. Give her a child, 2 children, 3 children, a long string of children. That is what I call philosophy. Moreover, it is happiness which is no folly. To have children is a glimpse of heaven. Have brats. Wipe them, blow their noses, dirt them, wash them, and put them to bed. Let them swarm about you. If they laugh, it is well. If they howl, it is better. To cry is to live. Watch them suck at 6 months, crawl at a year, walk at 2, grow tall at 15, fall in love at 20. He who has these joys have everything. For myself, I lacked the advantage, and that is the reason why I am a brute. God, a composer of beautiful poems and the first of men of letters, said to his fellow workman, Moses, increase and multiply. Such is the text. Multiply, you beast. As to the world, it is as it is. You cannot make nor mar it. Do not trouble yourself about it. Pay no attention to what goes on outside. Leave the horizon alone. A comedian is made to be looked at, not to look. Do you know what there is outside? The happy by look. You, I repeat, are the happy by chance. You are the pickpocket of the happiness of which they are the proprietors. They are the legitimate possessors. You are the intruder. You live in concubinage with luck. What do you want that you have not already? Shibboleth, help me. This fellow is a rascal. To multiply himself by Dea would be pleasant, all the same. Such happiness is like a swindle. Those above who possess happiness by privilege do not like folks below them to have so much enjoyment. If they ask you what right you have to be happy, you will not know what to answer. You have no patent, and they have. Jupiter, Allah, Vishnu, Sabaoth, it does not matter who, has given them the passport to happiness. Fear them. Do not meddle with them, lest they should meddle with you. Wretch, do you know what the man is who is happy by right? He is a terrible being. He is a lord. A lord! He must have intrigued pretty well in the devil's unknown country before he was born, to enter life by the door he did. How difficult it must have been to him to be born. It is the only trouble he has given himself, but, just heavens, what a one! To obtain from destiny the blind blockhead, to mark him in his cradle a master of men, to bribe the box-keeper, to give him the best place at the show. Read the memoranda in the old hut, which I have placed on half-pay. Read that breviary of my wisdom, and you will see that it is to be lord. A lord is one who has all and is all. A lord is one who exists above his own nature. A lord is one who has, when young, the rights of an old man, when old, the success in intrigue of a young one, if vicious, the homage of respectable people, if a coward, the command of brave men. If a do-nothing, the fruits of labor; if ignorant, the diploma of Cambridge or Oxford; if a fool, the admiration of poets; if ugly, the smiles of women; if a Thersites, the helm of Achilles; if a hare, the skin of a lion. Do not misunderstand my words. I do not say that a lord must necessarily be ignorant, a coward, ugly, stupid, or old. I only mean that he may be all those things without any detriment to himself. On the contrary, lords are princes. The King of England is only a lord, the first peer of the peerage. That is all. But it is much. Kings were formerly called lords. The Lord of Denmark, the Lord of Ireland, the Lord of the Isles. The Lord of Norway was first called king 300 years ago. Lucius, the most ancient king in England, was spoken to by Saint Telephonius. Telesphonus. As my Lord Lucius. The lords are peers, that is to say, equals. Of whom? Of the king. I do not commit the mistake of confounding the lords with Parliament, the assembly of the people, which the Saxons before the conquest called Witenagemot, the Normans, after the conquest, entitled Parlamentum. By degrees, the people who turned out, the king's letters clause convoking the commons, addressed formerly ad concilium impendendum, are now addressed ad consentiendum. To say yes is their liberty. The peers can say no, and the proof is that they have said it. The peers can cut off the king's head. The people cannot. The stroke of the hatchet which decapitates Charles I is an encroachment not on the king, but on the peers, and it is well to place on the gibbet the carcass of Cromwell. The lords have power. Why? Because they have riches. Who has turned over the leaves of Doomsday Book? It is the proof that the lords possess England. It is the registry of the estates of subjects compiled under William the Conqueror, and it is in the charge of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. To copy anything in it you have to pay 2d. a line. It is a proud book. Do you know that I was domestic doctor to a lord who was called Marmaduke, and who had 36,000 a year? Think of that, you hideous idiot. Do you know that, with rabbits only from the warrens of Earl Lindsay, they could feed all the riffraff on the Cinque Ports? And the good order kept, every poacher is hung. For 2 long furry ears sticking out of the game bag, I saw the father of 6 children hanging on the gibbet. Such is the peerage. The rabbit of a good lord is the more important than God's image in the man. Lords exist, you trespasser, do you see? And we must think it good that they do. And even if we do not, what harm will it do them? The people object, indeed. Why, Plautus himself could never have attained the comicality of such an idea. A philosopher would be jesting if he advised the poor devil of the masses to cry out against the size and weight of the Lord. Just as well might the gnat dispute with the foot of an elephant. One day I saw a hippopotamus tread upon a molehill. He crushed it utterly. He was innocent. The great, soft-headed fool of a mastodon did not even know of the existence of moles. My son, the moles that are trodden on are the human race. The crush is a law. And do not think that the mole himself crushes nothing. Why, it is the mastodon of the flesh-worm who is the mastodon of the globe-worm. But let us cease arguing. My boy, there are coaches in the world. My lord is inside, the people under the wheels, the philosopher gets out of the way. Stand aside and let them pass. As to myself, I love lords, and shun them. I lived with one. The beauty of my recollections suffices me. I remember his country house, like a glory in a cloud. My dreams are all retrospective. Nothing could be more admirable than Marmaduke Lodge in grandeur. Beautiful symmetry, rich avenues, and the ornaments and surroundings of the edifice. The houses, country seats, and palaces of the lords present a selection of all that is greatest and most magnificent in this flourishing kingdom. I love our lords. I thank them for being opulent, powerful, and prosperous. I myself am clothed in shadow, and I look with interest upon the shred of heavenly blue which is called a lord. You enter Marmaduke Lodge by an exceedingly spacious courtyard, which forms an oblong square, divided into 8 spaces, each surrounded by a balustrade. On each side is a wide approach, and a superb hexagonal fountain plays in the midst. This fountain is formed by 2 basins, which are surmounted by a dome of exquisite openwork, elevated on 6 columns. It was there that I knew a learned Frenchman, Monsieur l'Abbé Ducrot, who belonged to the Jacobin monastery in the Rue Saint-Jacques. Half the library of Urpenius is at Marmaduke Lodge, and the other half being at the Theological Gallery at Cambridge. I used to read the books, seated under the ornamented portal. These things are only shown to a select number of curious travelers. Do you know, you ridiculous boy, that William North, who is Lord Grey of Rolleston and sits 14th on the bench of barons, has more forest trees on his mountains than you have hares on your horrible noddle? Do you know that Lord Norrie of Rycote, who is Earl of Abingdon, has a square keep has a square keep 100 feet high, having this device Virtus, Arieti Fortois, which you would think meant that virtue is stronger than a ram, but which really means, you idiot, that courage is stronger than a battering machine. Yes, I honor, accept, respect, and revere our lords. It is the lords who, with her royal majesty, work to procure and preserve the advantages of the nation. Their consummate wisdom shines in intricate junctures. Their precedence over others I wish they had not, but they have it. What is called principality in Germany, grandeeship in Spain, is called peerage in England and France. There being a fair show of reason for considering the world a wretched place enough, heaven felt where the burden was most galling, and to prove that it knew how to make people happy, created lords for the satisfaction of philosophers. This acts as a set-off, and gets heaven out of the scrape, affording it a decent escape from a false position. The great are great. A peer, speaking of himself, says we. A peer is a plural. The king qualifies the peer sanguinei nostri. The peers have made a multitude of wise laws, amongst others, one which condemns to death anyone who cuts down a 3-year-old poplar tree. Their supremacy is such that they have a language of their own. In heraldic style, black, which is called sable for gentry, is called Saturn for princes, and diamond for peers. Diamond dust, a night thick with stars, such is the night of the happy. Even amongst themselves these high and mighty lords have their own distinctions. A baron cannot wash a viscount without his permission. These are indeed excellent things, and safeguards to the nation. What a fine thing it is for the people to have 25 dukes, 5 marquises, 26 earls, 9 viscounts, and 61 barons, making altogether 176 peers, of which some are your grace, and some my lords. What matter a few rags here and there withal? Everybody cannot be dressed in gold. Let the rags be. Cannot you see the purple? One balances the other. A thing must be built of something. Yes, of course, these are the poor. What of them? They line the happiness of the wealthy. Devil take it. Our lords are our glory. The pack of hounds belonging to Charles, Baron Mahone, costs him as much as the hospital for lepers in Moorgate, and for Christ's Hospital founded for children in 1553 by Charles VI. Thomas Osborne, Duke of Leeds, spends yearly on his liveries 5,000 golden guineas. The Spanish grandees have a guardian appointed by law to prevent their ruining themselves. That is cowardly. Our lords are extravagant and magnificent. I esteem them for it. Let us not abuse them like envious folks. I feel happy when a beautiful vision passes. I have not the light, but I have the reflection. A reflection thrown on my ulcer, you will say. Go to the devil. I am a Job, delighted in the contemplation of Trimalcion. Oh, that beautiful and radiant planet up there. But the moonlight is something. To suppress the lords was an idea which Orestes, mad as he was, would not have dared to entertain. To say that the lords are mischievous or useless is as much as to say that the state would be revolutionized, and that men are not made to live like cattle, browsing the grass and bitten by dog. The field is shorn by the sheep by the shepherd. It is all one to me. I am a philosopher, and I care about life as much as a fly. Life is but a lodging. When I think that Henry Bowes Howard, Earl of Berkshire, has in his stable 24 state carriages, of which one is mounted in silver and another in gold, good heavens! I know that everyone has not got 24 state carriages, but there is no need to complain for all that. Because you were cold one night, what was that to him? It concerns you only. Others besides you suffer cold and hunger. Don't you know that without that cold, Dea would not have been blind, and if Dea were not blind, she would not love you? Think of that, you fool. And besides, if all the people who are lost were to complain, there would be a pretty tumult. Silence is the rule. I have no doubt that heaven impulses silence on the damned. Otherwise, heaven itself would be punished by their everlasting cry. The happiness of Olympus is bought by the silence of Ocotus. Then, people, be silent. I do better myself. I approve and admire. Just now I was enumerating the lords, and I ought to add to the list 2 archbishops and 24 bishops. Truly, I am quite affected when I think of it. I remember to have seen the tithe gathering of the Reverend Dean of Raphoe, who combined the peerage with the church, a great tithe of beautiful wheat taken from the peasants in the neighborhood, and which the dean had not been at the trouble of growing. This left him time to say his prayers. Do you know that Lord Marmaduke, my master, was Lord Grand Treasurer of Ireland and High Seneschal of Sovereignty of Knaresborough in the county of York? Do you know that the Lord High Chamberlain, which is an office hereditary in the family of the Dukes of Ancaster, dresses the king for his coronation and receives for his trouble 40 yards of crimson velvet, besides the bed on which the king has slept, and that the usher of the Black Rod is his deputy? I should like to see you deny this, that the senior Viscount of England is Robert Brent, created a Viscount by Henry V. The Lord's titles imply sovereignty over land, except that of Earl Rivers, who takes his title from his family name. How admirable is the right which they have to tax others, and to levy, for instance, 4 shillings in the pound sterling income tax, which has just been continued for another year. And all the time taxes on distilled spirits, and on the excise of wine and beer, on the tonnage and poundage, on cider, on perry, on mum, malt, and prepared barley, on coals, and on 100 things besides. Let us venerate things as they are. The clergy themselves depend on the lords. The bishops of Man is subject to the Earl of Derby. The lords have wild beasts of their own, which they place in their armorial bearings. God not having made enough, they have invented others. They have created the heraldic wild boar, who is as much above the wild boar as the wild boar is above the domestic pig, and the Lord is above the priest. They have created the griffin, which is an eagle to lions, and a lion to eagles, terrifying lions by his wings, and eagles by his mane. They have the guivere, the unicorn, the serpent, the salamander, the tarisk, the dree, the dragon, and the hippogriff. All these things, terrible to us, are to them but an ornament and an embellishment. They have a menagerie which they call the blazon, in which unknown beasts roar. The prodigies of the forest are nothing compared to the inventions of their pride. Their vanity is full of phantoms which move as in a sublime night, armed with helm and cuirass, spurs on their heels, and scepters in their hands, saying in a grave voice, "We are the ancestors." The cankerworms eat the roots, and the panoplies eat the people. Why not? Are we to change the laws? The peerage is part of the order of society. Do you know that there is a duke in Scotland who can ride 90 miles without leaving his own estate? Do you know that the Archbishop of Canterbury has a revenue of £40,000 a year? Do you know that Her Majesty has £700,000 sterling from civil list, besides castles, forests, domains, fiefs, tenancies, freeholds, prebendaries, tithes, rent, confiscations, and fines, which bring in over 1,000,000 sterling? Those who are not yet satisfied are hard to please. Yes, murmured Gwynplaine sadly. The paradise of the rich is made out of the hell of the poor. End of chapter 11, which was composed of 3 paragraphs. Oh man. Okay, so chapter 11 summed up in exactly what Gwynplaine just said. The paradise of the rich is made out of the hell of the poor. So succinctly said. But Ursus goes on this huge tirade. I'm imagining him pacing back and forth is what's happening. That's what I'm thinking is going on. Just talking about the rich, the aristocracy, all of these things, and again, how they don't really have to do anything, and they get all of this money, and they have all of this land, and it's very insular, and how they are profiting from the poor and stepping on the poor. But they can do and be anything, and the poor and the lower classes in general are just like, oh, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you're beautiful, all of these things, which isn't true, but they like have to say that because who knows what would happen if they don't. We all know. Chapter 12. Ursus the poet drags on Ursus the philosopher. Then Dea entered. He looked at her and saw nothing but her. This is love. One may be carried away for a moment by the importunity of some other idea, but the beloved one enters, and all that does not appertain to her presence immediately fades away, without her dreaming that perhaps she is effacing in us a world. Let us mention a circumstance. In Chaos Vanquished, the world monstruo, addressed to Gwynplaine, displeased Dea, sometimes with the smattering of Spanish, which everyone knew at the period. She took it into her head to replace it by quiero, which signifies I wish it. Ursus tolerated, although not without an expression of impatience, this alteration in the text. He might have said to Dea, as in our day Mozart said to Visat, "Tu manques de respect au repertoire." The Laughing Man. Such was the form of Gwynplaine's fame. His name, Gwynplaine, little known at any time, had disappeared under his nickname, as his face had disappeared under its grin. His popularity was like his visage, a mask. His name, however, was to be read on a large placard in front of the Green Box, which offered the crowd the following narrative composed by Ursus. Here is to be seen Gwynplaine, deserted at the age of 10 on the night of the 29th of January, 1690, by the villainous Comprachicos on the coast of Portland. The little boy has grown up and is called now the Laughing Man. The existence of these mountebanks was as an existence of lepers in a leper house, and of the blessed in one of the Pleiades. There was every day a sudden transition from the noisy exhibition outside into the most complete seclusion. Every evening they made their exit from this world. They were like the dead, vanishing on condition of being reborn next day. A comedian is a revolving light, appearing one moment, disappearing the next, and existing for the public but as a phantom or a light as his life circles round. To exhibition succeeded isolation. When the performance was finished, whilst the audience was dispersing, and their murmur of satisfaction was dying away in the streets, the Green Box shut up its platform, as a fortress does its drawbridge, and all communication with mankind was cut off. On one side the universe, on the other the caravan. And this caravan contained liberty, clear consciences, courage, devotion, innocence, happiness, love, all the constellations. Blindness having sight and deformity beloved sat side by side, hand pressing hand, brow touching brow, and whispered to each other, intoxicated with love. The compartment in the middle served two purposes. For the public it was a stage, for the actors a dining room. Ursus, ever delighted in comparisons, profited by the diversity of its uses to liken the central compartment in the Green Box to the Aradak in an Abyssinian. Ursus counted the receipts. Then they supped. In love, all is ideal. In love, eating and drinking together affords opportunities for many sweet, promiscuous touches, by which a mouthful becomes a kiss. They drank ale or wine from the same glass, as they might drink dew out of the same lily. Two souls in love are as full of grace as two birds. Gwynplaine waited on Dea, cut her bread, poured out her drink, approached her too close. "Humph!" cried Ursus, and he turned away, his scolding melting into a smile. The wolf supped under the table, heedless of everything which did actually not concern his bone. Phoebe and Venus shared the repast, but gave little trouble. These vagabonds, half wild and as uncouth as ever, spoke in the gypsy language to each other. At length Dea re-entered the woman's apartment with Phoebe and Venus. Ursus chained up Homo under the green box. Gwynplaine looked after the horses. The lover became a groom, like a hero of Homer's or a paladin of Charlemagne's. At midnight all were asleep, except the wolf, who, alive in his responsibility, now and then opened an eye. The next morning they met again. They breakfasted together, generally on ham and tea. Tea was introduced into England in 1678. Then Dea, after the Spanish fashion, took a siesta, acting on the advice of Ursus, who considered her delicate, and slept some hours, while Gwynplaine and Ursus did all the little jobs of work, without and within, which their wandering life made necessary. Gwynplaine rarely wandered away from the Green Box, except on unfrequented roads and in solitary places. In cities he went out only at night, disguised in a large, slouched hat, so as not to exhibit his face in the street. His face was to be seen uncovered only on the stage. The Green Box had frequented cities but little. Gwynplaine, at 24, had never seen towns larger than the Cinque Ports. His renown, however, was increasing. He began to rise above the populace and to percolate through higher ground, amongst those who were fond of, and ran after, strange foreign curiosities and prodigies. It was known that there was something in existence leading a wandering life, now here, now there, an extraordinary monster. They talked about him. They sought him. They asked where he was. The Laughing Man was becoming decidedly famous. A certain luster was reflected on chaos vanquished. So much so that one day, Ursus, being ambitious, said, "We must go to London." Ooh, end of the book, too. End of the chapter, end of the book. Okay, so oopsie toodle. This last one, we get the first mention of the Laughing Man, which is fun. And that nickname has sort of overcome his actual name, Gwynplaine, just as his carved features have overcome his actual face. And we just sort of get, their successes, and they're growing in popularity, and people are, they're being known before they even reach places now for the Laughing Man and for their performance. So now Ursus is like, you know what? Let's go to Europe. Is that what he says? Let's go to London. They're already in Europe, my friends. Let's go to London. And that's the end of book 2. So let's see how it goes. Let's do it. Book the 3rd. The beginning of the fissure. Chapter 1. The Tadcaster Inn. At that period, London had but one bridge. London Bridge, with houses built upon it. This bridge united London and Southwark. a suburb which was paved with flint pebbles taken from the Thames, divided into small streets and alleys, like the city, with a great number of buildings, houses, dwellings, and wooden huts jammed together, a pell-mell mixture of combustible matter, amidst which fire might take its pleasure, as 1666 had proved. Southwark was then pronounced Soudrick. It is now pronounced Sauserak, or near it. Indeed, an excellent way of pronouncing English names is not to pronounce them. Perfect. Thus, for Southampton, they say Studenton. It was the time when Chatham was pronounced Je t'aime. The Southwark of those days resembles the Southwark of today about as much as Vargerard resembles Marseille. It was a vintage. It is a city. Nevertheless, a considerable trade was carried on there. The long, old, cyclopean wall by the Thames was studded with rings, to which were anchored the river barges. This wall was called the Effroc Wall, or Effroc Stone. York, in Saxon times, was called Effroc. The legend related that a Duke of Effroc had been drowned at the foot of the wall. Jeez. Certainly the water there was deep enough to drown a duke. At low water it was 6 good fathoms. The excellence of this little anchorage attracted sea vessels, and the old Dutch tub called the Vograat came to anchor at the Effroc Stone. The Vograat made the crossing from London to Rotterdam, and from Rotterdam to London, punctually once a week. Other barges started twice a day, either for Deptford, Greenwich, or Gravesend, going down with one tide and returning with the other. The voyage of Gravesend, though 20 miles, was performed in 6 hours. The Vograat was of a model now no longer to be seen, except in naval museums. It was almost a junk. At that time, while France copied Greece, Holland copied China. The Vograat was heavy hull with 2 masts, was partitioned perpendicularly so as to be watertight, having a narrow hold in the middle and 2 decks, one fore and the other aft. The decks were flush as in the iron torrent vessels of the present day, the advantage of which is that in foul weather the force of the wave is diminished, and the inconvenience of which is that the crew is exposed to the action of the sea, owing to there being no bulwarks. There was nothing to save anyone on board from falling over. Hence the frequent falls overboard and the losses of men, which have caused the model to fall into disuse. The Vograat went to Holland direct, and did not even call at Gravesend. An old ridge of stones, rock as much as masonry, ran along the bottom of the Effroc Stone, and being passable at all tides, was used as a passage on board the ships moored to the wall. This wall was, at intervals, furnished with steps. It marked the southern point of Southwark. An embankment at the top allowed the passer-by to rest their elbows on the Effroc Stone, as on the parapet of a quay. Thence they could look down on the Thames. On the other side of the water London dwindled away into fields. Up the river from the Effroc Stone, at the bend of the Thames which is nearly opposite St. James's Palace, behind Lambeth House, not far from the walk then called Vauxhall, probably, there was between a pottery in which they made porcelain, and a glass blowers, which they made ornamental bottles, one of those large enclosed spaces covered with grass, called formerly in France cultures and mails, and in England bowling greens. Of bowling green, a green on which to roll a ball, the French have made bowling green. Folks have this green inside their houses nowadays, only it is put on the table, is a cloth instead of turf, and is called billiards. It is difficult to see why, having boulevard, which is the same word as bowling green, the French should have adopted bowling green. It is surprising that a person so grave as the dictionary should indulge in useless luxuries. The bowling green of Southwark was called Tarrinzeau Field because it had belonged to the Baron Hasting, who are also Barons Tarrinzeau and Mauchline. From the Lords Hasting, the Tarrinzeau Field passed to the Lords Tadcaster, who had made a speculation of it, just as, at a later date, a Duke of Orleans made a speculation of the Palais Royal. Tarrinzeau Fields afterwards became waste ground and parochial property. Tarrinzeau Field was a kind of permanent fairground covered with jugglers, athletes, mountebanks, and music on the platforms, and always full of fools going to look at the devil, as Archbishop Sharp said. To look at the devil means to go to the play. Several inns which harbored the public and sent them to these outlandish exhibitions were established in this place, which kept holiday all the year round and thereby prospered. These inns were simply stalls, inhabited only during the day. In the evening the tavern keeper put into his pocket the key of the tavern and went away. One only of these inns was a house, the only dwelling in the whole bowling green, the caravans of the fairground having the power of disappearing at any moment, considering the absence of any ties in the vagabond life of all mountebanks. Mountebanks have no roots to their lives. This inn, called the Tadcaster, after the former owners of the ground, was an inn rather than a tavern, a hotel rather than an inn, and a carriage entrance and a large yard. The carriage entrance, opening from the court on the field, was the legitimate door of the Tadcaster Inn, which had, beside it, a small bastard door, by which people entered. To call it bastard is to mean preferred. This lower door was the only one used. It opened into the tavern, properly so called, which was a large tap-room, full of tobacco smoke, furnished with tables, and low in the ceiling. Over it was a window on the first floor, to the iron bars of which was fastened and hung the sign of the inn. The principal door was barred and bolted, and always remained closed. It was thus necessary to cross the tavern to enter the courtyard. At the Tadcaster Inn there was a landlord and a boy. The landlord was called Master Nicholas. The boy, Govicum? Gavicum? Govicum. Master Nicholas, doubtless, which the English habit of contraction had made Nicholas, was a miserly widower, and one who respected and feared the laws. As to his appearance, he had bushy eyebrows and hairy hands. The boy, aged 14, who poured out drink and answered to the name of Govicum, wore a merry face and an apron. His hair was cropped close, a sign of servitude. He slept on the ground floor, in a nook in which they formerly kept a dog. This nook had for window a bull's eye, looking on the bowling green. End of chapter 1. Okay, so lots of history about the place specifically, and then also about like how the pronunciation and spelling of places have changed. But we are introduced to the inn and the two people who work there, which is Nicholas and Govicum. We're getting a lot of history, and I realized the other day that there is a subtitle to this book, which is A Romance of English History. It's like, we're getting a lot of history. Yes, we are. It is the intention. Chapter 2. Open Air Eloquence. One very cold and windy evening, on which there was every reason why folks should hasten on their way along the street, a man who was walking in Tarrinzeau Field, close under the walls of the tavern, stopped suddenly. It was during the last months of winter between 1704 and 1705. This man, whose dress indicated a sailor, was of good mien and fine figure, things imperative to courtiers, and not forbidden to common folk. Why did he stop? To listen. What to? To a voice apparently speaking in the court on the other side of the wall, a voice a little weakened by age, but so powerful notwithstanding that it reached the passer-by in the street. At the same time might be heard in the enclosure from which the voice came the hubbub of a crowd. This voice said, "Men and women of London, here I am. I cordially wish you joy of being English. You are a great people. I say more. You are a great populace. Your fisticuffs are even better than your sword thrusts. You have an appetite. You are the nation which eats other nations, a magnificent function. This section of the world makes England preeminent, as politicians and philosophers, in the management of colonies, populations, and industry, and in the desire to do others any harm which may turn to your own good, you stand alone. The hour will come when two boards will be put up on earth, inscribed on one side men, on the other Englishmen. I mention this to your glory, I, who am neither English nor human, having the honor to be a bear. Still more, I am a doctor. That follows. Gentlemen, I teach what? Two kinds of things. Things which I know, and things which I do not. I sell my drugs and I sell my ideas. Approach and listen. Science invites you. Open your ear. If it is small, it will hold but little truth. If large, a great deal of folly will find its way in. Now, then, attention. I teach the pseudoxia epidemica. I have a comrade who will make you laugh, but I will make you think. We live in the same box, laughter being of quite as old a family as thought. When people ask Democritus, "How do you know?" he answered, "I laugh." And if I am asked, "Why do you laugh?" I shall answer, "I know." However, I am not laughing. I am the rectifier of popular errors. I take upon myself the task of cleaning your intellects. They require it. Heaven permits people to deceive themselves and to be deceived. It is useless to be absurdly modest. I frankly avow that I believe in Providence, even where it is wrong. Only when I see filth, errors are filth, I sweep them away. How am I sure of what I know? That concerns only myself. Everyone catches wisdom as he can. Lactantius asked questions of, and received answers from, a bronze head of Virgil. Sylvester II conversed with birds. Did the birds speak? Did the Pope twitter? That is a question. The dead child of the Rabbi Elcazar talked to St. Augustine. Between ourselves, I doubt all these facts except the last. The dead child might perhaps talk, because under its tongue it had a gold plate on which were engraved divers constellations. Thus he deceived people. The fact explains itself. You see my moderation. I separate the truth from the false. See, here are other errors in which no doubt you partake, poor ignorant folks that you are, and from which I wish to free you. Dioscorides believed that there was a god in the henbane, Chrysippus in the sinopaste, Josephus in the root-berries, Homer in the plant moly. There were all wrongs. The spirit and herbs are not gods, but devils. I have tested this fact. It is not true that the serpent which tempted Eve had a human face, as Cadmus relates. Garcia de Horto, Cadamosto, and John Hugo, Archbishop of Treves, deny that it is sufficient to saw down a tree to catch an elephant. I incline to their opinion. Citizens, the effort of Lucifer are the cause of all false impressions. Under the reign of such a prince, it is natural that meteors of error and of perdition should arise. My friends, Claudius Pulcher did not die because the fowls refused to come out of the fowl house. The fact is that Lucifer, having foreseen the death of Claudius Pulcher, took care to prevent the birds feeding, that Beelzebub gave the Emperor Vespasian the virtue of curing the lame and giving sight to the blind, by his touch was an act praiseworthy in itself, but of which the motive was culpable. Gentlemen, distrust those false doctors who sell the root of the bryony and the white snake, and who make washes with honey and the blood of a cock. See clearly through that which is false. It is not quite true that Orion was the result of a natural function of Jupiter. The truth is that it was Mercury who produced this star in that way. It is not true that Adam had a navel. When St. George killed the dragon, he had not the daughter of a saint standing by his side. St. Jerome had not a clock on the chimney piece of his study. First, because living in a cave he had no study. Secondly, because he had no chimney piece. Thirdly, because clocks were not yet invented. Let us put these things right. Put them right. Oh, gentlefolk, who listen to me, if anyone tells you that a lizard will be born in your head if you smell the herb valerian, that the rotting carcass of the ox changes into bees, and that the horse into hornets, that a man weighs more when dead than alive, that the blood of the he-goat dissolves emeralds, that a caterpillar, a fly, and a spider seen on the same tree announces famine, war, and pestilence, and the falling sickness is to be cured by a worm found in the head of a buck, do not believe him. These things are errors. But now listen to truths. The skin of a seal calf is a safeguard against thunder. The toad feeds upon earth, which causes a stone to come into his head. The rose of Jericho blooms on Christmas Eve. Serpents cannot endure the shadow of the ash tree. The elephant has no joints, and rests and sleeps resting upright against a tree. Make a toad sit upon a rooster's egg, and he will hatch a scorpion, which will become a salamander. A blind person will recover sight by putting one hand on the left side of the altar and the other on his eyes. Virginity does not hinder maternity. Honest people, lay these truths to heart. Above all, you can believe in Providence in either of two ways, either as thirst believes in the orange, or as the ass believes in the whip. Now I am going to introduce you to my family. Here was a violent gust of wind shook the window frames and shutters of the inn, which stood detached. It was like a prolonged murmur of the sky. The orator paused a moment, and then resumed. An interruption. Very good. Speak, North Wind. Gentlemen, I am not angry. The wind is loquacious, like all solitary creatures. There is no one to keep him company up here, so he jabbers. I resume the thread of my discourse. Here you see associated artists. You are four, a lupo principium. I begin by my friend who is a wolf. He does not conceal it. See him. He is educated, grave, and sagacious. Providence, perhaps, entertained for a moment the idea of making him a doctor of the university, but for that one must be rather stupid, and that he is not. I may add that he has no prejudices and is not aristocratic. He chats sometimes with bitches, he who, by right, should consort only with she-wolves. His heirs, if he have any, will no doubt gracefully combine the yap with their mother and the howl of their father, because he does howl. He howls in sympathy with men. He barks as well, in condescension to civilization, a magnanimous concession. Homo is a dog made perfect. Let us venerate the dog. The dog, curious animal, sweats with its tongue and smiles with its tail. Gentlemen, Homo equals in wisdom and surpasses in cordiality the hairless wolf of Mexico, the wonderful Zoloinsky. I may add that he is humble. He has the modesty of a wolf who is useless to men. He is helpful and charitable, and says nothing about it. His left paw knows not the good which his right paw does. These are his merits. Of the other, my second friend, I have but one word to say. He is a monster. You will admire him. He was formerly abandoned by pirates on the shores of the wild ocean. This third one is blind. Is she an exception? No. We are all blind. The miser is blind. He sees gold, and he does not see riches. The prodigal is blind. He sees the beginning and does not see the end. The coquette is blind. She does not see her wrinkles. The learned man is blind. He does not see his own ignorance. The honest man is blind. He does not see the thief. The thief is blind. He does not see God. God is blind. The day that he created the world, he did not see the devil manage to creep into it. I myself am blind. I speak and do not see that you are deaf. This blind girl who accompanies us is a mysterious priestess. Vesta has confided to her her torch. She has in her character depths as soft as a division in the wool of a sheep. I believe her to be a king's daughter, though I do not assert it as a fact. A laudable distrust is the attribute of wisdom. For my own part, I reason and I doctor. I think and I heal. I cure fevers, miasmas, and plagues. Almost all our melancholy and sufferings are issues which, if carefully treated, relieve us quietly from other evils which might be worse. All the same, I do not recommend you to have an anthrax, otherwise called carbuncle. It is a stupid malady and serves no good end. One dies of it. That is all. I am neither uncultivated nor rustic. I honor eloquence and poetry and live in an innocent union with these goddesses. I conclude by a piece of advice. Ladies and gentlemen, on the sunny side of your dispositions, cultivate virtue, modesty, honesty, probity, justice, and love. Each one here below may thus have his little pot of flowers on his window-sill. My lords and gentlemen, I have spoken. The play is about to begin. The man, who was apparently a sailor, and who had been listening outside, entered the lower room of the inn, crossed it, paid the necessary entrance money, reached the courtyard, which was full of people, saw at the bottom of it a caravan on wheels, wide open, and on the platform an old man dressed in a bearskin, a young man looking like a mask, a blind girl, and a wolf. "Gracious heavens!" he cried. "What delightful people!" End of chapter 2. All right, so this chapter, we're in London, and we have somebody who is walking by just on a walk, and what does he hear? He hears what is Ursus preaching on a little soapbox, I'm assuming, and just talking about and hyping up him and his touring crew to see the play. And he's just saying, like, yes, we have a blind girl, but what, aren't we all blind? And goes through how each type of person is blind. And yes, we have a wolf, but he is the smartest wolf, and let me tell you, and then just goes on about how amazing his wolf is. And yes, I am a doctor, and let me tell you, I fix this and this and this and this and blah, blah, blah. And yes, we have some. Chapter 3, where the passerby reappears. The Green Box, as we have just seen, had arrived in London. It was established at Southwark. Ursus had been tempted by the bowling green, which had one great recommendation, that it was always a fair day there, even in winter. The dome of St. Paul's was a delight to Ursus. London, take it all in all, has some good in it. It was a brave thing to dedicate a cathedral to St. Paul. The real cathedral saint is St. Peter. St. Peter is suspected of imagination, and in matters of ecclesiastical imagination it means hearsay. Heresy. Scusums. St. Paul is a saint only with extenuating circumstances. He entered heaven only by the artist's door. A cathedral is a sign. St. Peter is the sign of Rome, the sign of the dogma. St. Paul, that of London, the sign of schism. Ursus, whose philosophy had arms so long that it embraced everything, was a man who appreciated these shades of difference, and his attraction towards London arose, perhaps, from a certain taste of his for St. Paul. The yard of the Tadcaster Inn had taken the fancy of Ursus. It might have been ordered for the Green Box. It was a theatre ready-made. It was square, with 3 sides built round, and a wall forming the 4th. Against this wall was placed the green box, which they were able to draw into the yard owing to the height of the gate. A large wooden balcony, roofed over and supported on posts, on which the rooms of the first story opened, ran round the three fronts of the interior facade of the house, making 2 right angles. The windows of the ground floor made boxes, the pavement of the court the pit, and the balcony the gallery. The green box, reared against the wall, was thus in front of a theatre. It was very like the Globe, where they played Othello, King Lear, and The Tempest. In a corner behind the green box was a stable. Ursus had made his arrangements with the tavern keeper, Master Nicholas, who, owing to his respect for the law, would not admit the wolf without charging him extra. The placard, Gwynplaine, the Laughing Man, taken from its nail in the green box, was hung up close to the sign of the inn. The sitting room of the tavern had, as we have seen, an inside door which opened into the court. By the side of the door was constructed offhand, by means of an empty barrel, a box for the money-taker, who was sometimes Phoebe and sometimes Venus. This was managed much as at present, pay and pass in. Under the placard announcing the Laughing Man was a piece of wood, painted white, hung on 2 nails, on which was written in charcoal in large letters the title of Ursus's grand piece, Chaos Vanquished. In the center of the balcony, precisely opposite the green box, and in a compartment having for entrance a window reaching to the ground, there had been partitioned off a space for the nobility. It was large enough to hold, in 2 rows, 10 spectators. "We are in London," said Ursus. "We must be prepared for the gentry." He had furnished this box with the best chairs in the inn, and had placed in the center a grand armchair of yellow velvet and a cherry-colored pattern, in case some alderman's wife should come. They began their performances. The crowd immediately flocked to them, but the compartment for the nobility remained empty. With that exception, their success became so great that no mountebank memory could recall its parallel. The Southwark ran in crowds to admire the Laughing Man. The Merry Andrews of Tarrinzeau Field were aghast at Gwynplaine. The effect he caused was as that of a sparrow-hawk flapping his wings in a cage of goldfinches and feeding in their seed trough. Gwynplaine ate up their public. Besides the small fry, the swallowers of swords, and the grimace-makers, real performances took place on the green. There was a circus of women, ringing from morning till night with a magnificent peal of all sorts of instruments: psalteries, drums, rebecks, micamons, timbrels, reeds, dulcimers, gongs, chevrets, bagpipes, German horns, English echequels, pipes, flutes. In a large round tent were some tumblers who could not have equalled our present climbers of the Pyrenees, Dolma, Bordenave, and Melonga, who from the peak of Parafet descend to the plateau of Limaçon on almost a perpendicular height. There was a traveling menagerie, where was to be seen a performing tiger who, lashed by the keeper, snapped at the whip and tried to swallow the lash. Even this comedian of jaws and claws was eclipsed in success. Curiosity, applause, receipts, crowds, the Laughing Man monopolized everything. It happened in the twinkling of an eye. Nothing was thought of but the green box. "Chaos vanquished is chaos, Victor," said Ursus, appropriating half Gwynplaine's success, and taking the wind out of his sails, as they say at sea. The success was prodigious. Still, it remained local. Fame does not cross the sea easily. It took 130 years for the name of Shakespeare to penetrate from England into France. The sea is a wall, and if Voltaire, a thing which he very much regretted when it was too late, had not thrown a bridge over to Shakespeare, Shakespeare might still be in England, on the other side of the wall, a captive in insular glory. The glory of Gwynplaine had not passed London Bridge. It was not great enough yet to re-echo throughout the city, at least not at first. But Southwark ought to have sufficed to satisfy the ambition of a clown. Ursus said, "The money bag grows palpably bigger." They played Ursus Versus, and chaos vanquished. Between the acts, Ursus exhibited his power as an engastrimist, and executed marvels of ventriloquism. He imitated every cry which occurred in the audience, a song, a cry, enough to startle, so exact the imitation, the singer or the crier himself, and now and then he copied the hubbub of the public, and whistled as if there was a crowd of people within him. These were remarkable talents. Besides this, he harangued like Cicero, as we have just seen, sold his drugs, attended sickness, and even healed the sick. Southwark was enthralled. Ursus was satisfied with the applause of Southwark, but by no means astonished. "They are the ancient Tribudantes," he said. Then he added, "I must not mistake them for delicacy of taste for the Atrebates, who people Berkshire, or the Belgians, who inhabited Somersetshire, nor for the Parisians, who founded York." At every performance, the yard of the inn, transformed into a pit, was filled with a ragged and enthusiastic audience. It was composed of watermen, chairmen, coachmen and bargemen, and sailors, just ashore, spending their wages in feasting and women. In it there were felons, ruffians, and blackguards, who were soldiers condemned for some crime against discipline to wear their red coats, which were lined with black inside out, and from thence the name of blackguard, which the French turn into blagueurs. All these flowed from the street into the theatre, and poured back from the theatre into the tap. The emptying of tankards did not decrease their success. Amidst what it is usual to call the scum, there was one taller than the rest, bigger, stronger, less poverty-stricken, broader in the shoulders, dressed like the common people, but not ragged, admiring and applauding everything to the skies, clearing his way with his fists, wearing a disordered periwig, swearing, shouting, joking, never dirty, and, at need, ready to blacken an eye or pay for a bottle. This frequenter was the passer-by whose cheer of enthusiasm has been recorded. This connoisseur was suddenly fascinated, and had adopted the laughing man. He did not come every evening, but when he came he led the public, applause grew into acclamation, success rose not to the roof, for there was none, but to the clouds, for there were plenty of them. Which clouds, seeing that there was no roof, sometimes wept over the masterpiece of Ursus. His enthusiasm caused Ursus to remark this man, and Gwynplaine to observe him. They had a great friend in this unknown visitor. Ursus and Gwynplaine wanted to know him, at least to know who he was. One evening, Ursus was in the side scene, which was the kitchen door of the Green Box. Seeing Master Nicholas standing by him, showed him that this man in the crowd, and asked him, "Do you know that man?" "Of course I do." "Who is he?" "A sailor." "What is his name?" said Gwynplaine, interrupting. "Tom Jim Jack," replied the innkeeper. Then, as he redescended the steps at the back of the Green Box to enter the inn, Master Nicholas let fall this profound reflection, so deep as to be unintelligible. What a pity that he should not be a lord! He would make a famous scoundrel. Otherwise, although established in the tavern, the group of the Green Box had in no way altered their manner of living, and held to their isolated habits. Except a few words exchanged now and then when the tavern keeper, they held no communication with any of those who were living, either permanently or temporarily in the inn, and continued to keep to themselves. Since they had been at Southwark, Gwynplaine had made it his habit, after the performance and the supper of both family and horses, when Ursus and Dea had gone to bed in their respective compartments, to breathe a little the fresh air of the bowling green between 11 o'clock and midnight. A certain vagrancy in our spirits impels us to take walks at night and to saunter under the stars. There is a mysterious expectation in youth. Therefore, it is that we are prone to wander out in the night without an object. At that hour there was no one in the fairground, except, perhaps, some reeling drunkard, making staggering shadows in dark corners. The empty taverns were shut up, and the lower room of the Tadcaster Inn was dark, except where, in some corner, a solitary candle lighted a last reveller. An indistinct glow gleamed through the window shutters of the half-closed tavern, as Gwynplaine, pensive, content, and dreaming, happy in a haze of divine joy, passed backwards and forwards in front of the half-open door. Of what was he thinking? Of Dea. Of nothing. Of everything. Of the depths. He never wandered far from the green box, being held, as by a thread, to Dea. A few steps away from it was far enough for him. Then he returned, found the whole green box asleep, and went to bed himself. End of chapter 3. All right, so this chapter, they are in London, and they're performing, and the Tadcaster Inn gets wind of this, and so the Tadcaster Inn is like, hey, perform here. So they have like an actual like venue spot, which is kind of cool. And this one person keeps coming back, and every time they are there, uh, they're cheering the loudest, they're laughing the loudest, they're leading the, expectation of how the crowd should be, and so the crowd sort of takes it up as well. Not there every night, but they're very frequent, and both Gwynplaine and Ursus have taken an interest in this person because they're able to pick out, the shouts and hollers and laugh and everything. And so one day they do ask Nicholas, like, who's that dude? It's a sailor. Okay, but like, what's his name? Says his name, but like, is it really his name? It might just be that it's a common name and can't really remember because it's like Tom, Jim, Jack, or whatever it was. And then we also have like a little instance of Gwynplaine needing and using quiet time. So like, while after everybody goes to sleep, he goes outside and just sort of like contemplates, has reflection, gets that alone time, which I'm sure is hard to find when you're living in such small quarters with like what, 4 other people? Yeah, maybe a little difficult. And that's where we left off. Chapter 4. Contraries fraternize in hate. Success is hateful, especially to those whom it overthrows. It is rare that the eaten adore the eaters. The Laughing Man had decidedly made a hit. Mountebanks around were indignant. A theatrical success is a siphon. It pumps in the crowd and creates emptiness all round. The shop opposite is done for. The increased receipts of the Green Box caused a corresponding decrease in the receipts of the surrounding shows. Those entertainments, popular up to that time, suddenly collapsed. It was like a low water mark, showing inversely, but in perfect concordance, the rise here, the fall there. Theaters experience the effect of tides. They rise in one only on condition of falling of another. The swarming foreigners who exhibited their talents and their trumpetings on the neighboring platforms, seeing themselves ruined by the Laughing Man, were despairing, yet dazzled. All the grimacers, all the clowns, all the Merry Andrews envied Gwynplaine. How happy he must be with the snout of a wild beast. The buffoon mothers and dancers of the tightrope, with pretty children, looked at them in anger, and pointing out Gwynplaine would say, "What a pity you have not a face like that." Some beat their babes savagely for being pretty. More than one, had she known the secret, would have fashioned her son's face in the Gwynplaine style. The head of an angel which brings no money in is not as good as that of a lucrative devil. One day the mother of a little child who was a marvel of beauty and who acted a Cupid exclaimed, "Our children are failures. They only succeeded with Gwynplaine." And shaking her fist at her son, she added, "If I only knew your father, wouldn't he catch it?" Gwynplaine was the goose with the golden eggs. What a marvelous phenomenon. There was an uproar through all the caravans. Enthusiastic and exasperated, looked at Gwynplaine and gnashed their teeth. Admiring anger is called envy. Then it howls. They tried to disturb chaos vanquished. Made a cabal, hissed, scolded, shouted. This was an excuse for Ursus to make out-of-door harangues to the populace, and for his friend Tom Jim Jack to use his fists to re-establish order. His pugilistic marks of friendship brought him still more under the notice and regard of Ursus and Gwynplaine. At a distance, however, for the group in the green box sufficed to themselves, and held aloof from the rest of the world, and because Tom Jim Jack, this leader of the mob, seemed a sort of supreme bully, without a tie, without a friend, a smasher of windows, a manager of men, now here, now gone, hail fellow, well met with everyone, companion of none. This raging envy against Gwynplaine did not give in for a few friendly hits from Tom Jim Jack. The outcries having miscarried, the mountebanks of Tarrinzeau Field fell back on a petition. They addressed to the authorities. This is the usual course. Against an unpleasant success, we try first to stir up the crowd, and then we petition the magistrate. With the Merry Andrews, the reverends allied themselves. The Laughing Man had inflicted a blow on the preachers. There were empty places not only in the caravans, but in the churches. The congregations in the churches of the 5 parishes in Southwark had dwindled away. People left before the sermon to go to Gwynplaine. Chaos vanquished. The green box, the Laughing Man, all the abominations of Baal eclipsed the eloquence of the pulpit. The voice crying in the desert, Vox calamantis in deserto, is discontented, and is prone to call for the aid of the authorities. The clergy of the 5 parishes complained to the Bishop of London, who complained to Her Majesty. The complaint of the Merry Andrews was based on religion. They declared it to be insulted. They described Gwynplaine as a sorcerer and Ursus as an atheist. The reverend gentlemen invoked social order. Setting orthodoxy aside, they took action on the fact that Acts of Parliament were violated. It was clever. Because it was the period of Mr. Locke, who had died but 6 months previously, 28th October 1704, and when skepticism, which Bolingbroke had imbibed from Voltaire, was taking root. Later on, Wesley came and restored the Bible, as Loyola restored the papacy. Thus the green box was battered on both sides, by the Merry Andrews, in the name of the Pentateuch, and by chaplains in the name of the police. In the name of heaven and of the spectators of nuisances, the green box was denounced by the priests as an obstruction, and by the jugglers as sacrilegious. Had they any pretext? Was there any excuse? Yes. What was the crime? This. There was a wolf. The dog was allowable. A wolf forbidden. In England, the wolf is an outlaw. England admits the dogs which bark which barks, but not the dog which howls, a shade of difference between the yard and the woods. The rectors and the vicars of the 5 parishes of Southwark called attention in their petitions to numerous parliamentary and royal statutes putting the wolf beyond the protection of the law. They moved for something like the imprisonment of Gwynplaine and the execution of the wolf, or at any rate for their banishment. The question was one of public importance, the danger of persons passing, etc., etc. And on this point they appealed to the faculty. They cited the opinion of the 80 physicians of London, a learned body which dates from Henry VIII, which has a seal like that of the state, which can raise sick people to the dignity of being amenable to their jurisdiction, which has the right to imprison those who infringe its law and contravene its ordinances, and which, amongst other useful regulations for the health of the parish citizens, put beyond doubt this fact acquired by science, that if a wolf sees a man first, the man becomes hoarse for life. Besides, he may be bitten. Homo, then, was a pretext. Ursus heard of these designs through the innkeeper. He was uneasy. He was afraid of 2 claws, the police and the justices. To be afraid of the magistracy, it is sufficient to be afraid. There is no need to be guilty. Ursus had no desire for contact with sheriffs, provosts, bailiffs, and coroners. His eagerness to make their acquaintance amounted to nil. His curiosity to see the magistrates was about as great as the hare's to see the greyhound. He began to regret that he had come to London. "Better is the enemy of good," he murmured he apart. "I thought the proverb was ill considered. I was wrong. Stupid truths are true truths." Against the coalition of powers, Mary Andrews taking in hand the cause of religion, and chaplains indignant in the name of medicine, the poor green box, suspected of sorcery in Gwynplaine and of hydrophobia in Homo, had only one thing in its favor, but a thing of great power in England: municipality inactivity. It is the local authorities letting things take their own course that Englishmen owe their liberty. Liberty in England behaves very much as the sea around England. It is a tide. Little by little manners surmount the law. A cruel system of legislation drowned under the wave of custom. A savage code of laws still visible through the transparency of universal liberty. Such is England. The Laughing Man, chaos vanquished, and Homo might have mountebanks, preachers, bishops, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, Her Majesty, London, and the whole of England against them, and remain undisturbed so long as Southwark permitted. The Green Box was a favourite amusement of the suburb, and the local authorities seemed disinclined to interfere. In England, indifference is protection, so long as the sheriff of the county of Surrey, to the jurisdiction of Southwark belongs, did not move to the matter. Ursus breathed freely, and Homo could sleep on his wolf's ears. So long as the hatred which it excited did not occasion acts of violence, it increased success. The Green Box was none the worse for it, for the time. On the contrary, hints were scattered that it contained something mysterious. Hence, the Laughing Man became more and more popular. The public follow with gusto the scent of anything contraband. To be suspected is a recommendation. The people adopted by instinct that at which the finger is pointed. The thing which is denounced is like the savor of forbidden fruit. We rush to eat it. Besides, applause which irritates someone, especially if that someone is in authority, is sweet. to perform whilst passing a pleasant evening, both an act of kindness to the oppressed and of opposition to the oppressor, is agreeable. You are protecting at the same time that you are being amused. So the theatrical caravans on the bowling green continue to howl and to cabal against the laughing man. Nothing could be better calculated to enhance his success. The shouts of one's enemies are useful and give point and vitality to one's triumphs. A friend wearies sooner in praise than an enemy in abuse. To abandon does not hurt. Enemies are ignorant of this fact. They cannot help insulting us, and this constitutes their use. They cannot hold their tongues, and thus keep the public awake. The crowds which flocked to Chaos Vanquished increased daily. Ursus kept what Master Nicholas had said of intriguers and complaints in high places to himself, and did not tell Gwynplaine, lest it should trouble the ease of his acting by creating anxiety. If evil was to come, he would be sure to know it soon enough. End of chapter 4. All right, so the popularity and excitement that they have created has made people mad on two different fronts. So religion and also like the law. So cool. And Ursus is like, okay, I'm not going to say anything to Gwynplaine because it's going to make him anxious and nervous and all of these things. But also, like, to be even suspected is to be as good as guilty. Like, you don't have to be guilty of anything as if you're suspected by the magistrate. It's up to their whims, basically. And how they are being, like, what they're doing that is illegal is that they have a wolf. That's all it is. That's how they're attacking them. So cool. But because they have this, they're becoming more and more popular. Because of course they are. Because you say that somebody is doing something, that's uncouth or whatever. Like, you're like, okay, well, then they got to be doing something, like, interesting. Good. It's like having those, like, mature labels on CDs. This is aging myself, but on CDs, and then, like, when you go to get them when you're, like, younger, you're like, oh, this is gonna be good. It says mature content. They're gonna swear on this. Okay. Chapter 5. The wapentake. Once, however, he thought it his duty to derogate from this prudence for prudence's sake, thinking that it might be well to make Gwynplaine uneasy. It is true that this idea arose from a circumstance much graver, in the opinion of Ursus, than the cabals, than the cabals of the fair or of the church. Gwynplaine, as he picked up a farthing which had fallen when counting the receipts, had, in the presence of the innkeeper, drawn a contrast between the farthing, representing the misery of the people, and the die, representing, under the figure of Anne, the parasitical magnificence of the throne. An ill-sounding speech. This observation was repeated by Master Nicholas, and had such a run that it reached to Ursus through Phoebe and Venus. It put Ursus into a fever. Seditious words, laissez me. He took Gwynplaine severely to task. Watch over your abominable jaws. There is a rule for the great, to do nothing, and a rule for the small, to say nothing. The poor man has but one friend, silence. He should only pronounce one syllable. Yes. To confess and to consent is all the right he has. Yes to the judge, yes to the king. Great people, if it pleases them to do so, beat us. I have received blows from them. It is their prerogative, and they lose nothing of their greatness by breaking our bones. The ossifrage is a species of eagle. Let us venerate the scepter, which is the first of staves. Respect is prudence, and mediocrity is safety. To insult the king is to put oneself in the same danger as a girl rashly paring the nails of a lion. They tell me that you have been prattling about the farthing, which is the same thing as the lizard, and that you have found fault in the august medallion for which they sell us to market, the 1/8 part of a salt herring. Take care. Let us be serious. Consider the existence of pains and penalties. Suck in these legislative truths. You are in a country in which the man who cuts down a tree 3 years old is quietly taken off to the gallows. As to swearers, their feet are put into the stocks. The drunkard is shut up in a barrel with the bottom out, so that he can walk with a hole in the top, through which his head is passed, and with 2 in the bung for his hands, so that he cannot lie down. He who strikes another one in Westminster Hall is imprisoned for life, and has his goods confiscated. Whoever strikes anyone in the king's palace has his hands struck off. A fillip on the nose chances to bleed, and behold, you are maimed for life. He who is convicted of heresy in the bishop's court is burnt alive. It is for no great matter that Cuthbert Simpson was quartered on a turnstile. 3 years since, in 1702, which is not long ago, you see, they placed in the pillory a scoundrel called Daniel Defoe, who had the audacity to print the names of the members of Parliament who had spoken on the previous evening. He who commits high treason is disemboweled alive, and they tear out his heart and buffet his cheeks with it. Impress on yourself notions of right and justice. Never allow yourself to speak a word, and at the first cause of anxiety, run for it. Such is the bravery which I counsel, and which is practice. In the way of temerity, imitate the birds. In the way of talking, imitate the fishes. England has one admirable point in her favor, that her legislation is very mild. His admonition over, Ursus remained uneasy for some time. Gwynplaine, not at all. The intrepidity of youth arises from want of experience. However, it seemed that Gwynplaine had good reason for his easy mind, for the weeks flowed on peacefully, and no bad consequences seem to have resulted from his observations about the queen. Ursus, we know, lacked apathy, and, like a roebuck on the watch, kept a lookout in every direction. One day, a short time after his sermon to Gwynplaine, as he was looking out from the window in the wall which commanded the field, he became suddenly pale. "Gwynplaine?" "What?" "Look." "Where?" "In the field." "Well? Do you see that passer-by?" "The man in black?" "Yes." "Who has a kind of mace in his hand?" "Yes." "Well?" "Well, Gwynplaine, that man is a wapentake." "What is a wapentake?" "He is the bailiff of the 100. "What is the bailiff of the 100? "He is the propistus hundredi. He is a terrible officer." "What has he got in his hand?" "The iron weapon." "What is the iron weapon?" "A thing made of iron." "What does he do with that?" "First of all, he swears upon it, for it is that reason that he is called the wapentake." "And then?" "Then he touches you with it." "With what?" "With the iron weapon." "The wapentake touches you with the iron weapon?" "Yes." "What does that mean?" "That means, follow me." "And must you follow?" "Yes." "Whither?" "How should I know?" "But he tells you where he is going to take you?" "No." How is that? He says nothing, and you say nothing. But he touches you with the iron weapon. All is over then. You must go." "But where?" "After him." "But where?" "Wherever he likes, Gwynplaine." "And if you resist?" You are hanged. Ursus looked out the window again, and drawing a long breath, said, Thank God he has passed. He is not coming here. Ursus was perhaps unreasonably alarmed about the indiscreet remark and the consequences likely to result from the unconsidered words of Gwynplaine. Master Nicholas, who had heard them, had no interest in compromising the poor inhabitants of the Green Box. He was amassing at the same time as the Laughing Man a nice little fortune. Chaos vanquished had succeeded in 2 ways. While it made art triumph on the stage, it made drunkenness prosper in the tavern. Interesting. Okay, so we see the wapentake, who is a bailiff who has this iron weapon, and he blesses the iron weapon and he touches you with it, and then you have to follow him wherever he wants. And we're worried about this because there have been rumors that people are mad and angry at the success of Ursus and Gwynplaine and Dea and like their whole troop. So Ursus is worried that the time has come, like this is the end. And so he's just like watching him, staring at him, blah blah blah, but then he just like walks on by and it's like, okay, we're safe. Mm-mm-mm. Chapter 6. The Mouse Examined by the Cats. Ursus was soon afterwards startled by another alarming circumstance. This time it was he himself who was concerned. He was summoned by Bishopsgate before a commission composed of 3 disagreeable countenances. They belonged to 3 doctors called overseers. One was a doctor of theology, delegated by the Dean of Westminster, another a doctor of medicine, delegated by the College of Surgeons, the third a doctor of history and civil law, delegated by Gresham College. These 3 experts in omni resilabi had a censorship of everything said in public throughout the bounds of the 130 parishes of London, the 73 of Middlesex, and, by extension, the 5 of Southwark. Such theological jurisdictions still subsist in England and do good service. In December 1868, by sentence of the Court of Arches, confirmed by the decision of the Privy Council, the Reverend Maconochie was censured, besides being condemned in costs for having placed lighted candles on a table. The liturgy allows no jokes. Ursus then, one fine day, received from the delegated doctors an order to appear before them, which was, luckily, given into his own hands, and which he was therefore enabled to keep a secret. Without saying a word, he obeyed the citation, shuddering at the thought that he might be considered culpable to the extent of having the appearance of being suspected of a certain amount of rashness. He who has so recommended silence to others had here a rough lesson. The 3 doctors, delegated and appointed overseers, sat at Bishopsgate, at the end of a room on the ground floor, in 3 armchairs covered with black leather, with 3 busts of Minos, Rhadamanthus, Aegis, in the wall above their heads, a table before them, and at their feet a form for the accused. Ursus, introduced by a tipstaff of placid but severe expression, entered, perceived the doctors, and immediately in his own mind gave to each of them the name of the judge of the infernal regions, represented by the bust placed above his head. Minos, the president, the representative of theology, made him a sign to sit down on the form. Ursus made a proper bow, that is to say, bowed to the ground, and knowing that bears are charmed by honey and doctors by Latin, he said, keeping his body still bent respectfully, Tres faciant capitulatum. Then, with head inclined, for modesty disarms, he sat down on the form. Each of the 3 doctors had before him a bundle of papers, of which he was turning the leaves. Minos began. "You speak in public?" "Yes," replied Ursus. "By what right?" "I am a philosopher." "That gives no right." "I am also a mountebank," said Ursus. "That is a different thing." Ursus breathed again, but with humility. Minos resumed. "As a mountebank you may speak. As a philosopher, you must keep silence." "I will try," said Ursus. Then he thought to himself, "I may speak, but I must be silent. How complicated!" He was much alarmed. The same overseer continued. "You say things which do not sound right. You insult religion, you deny the most evident truths, you propagate revolting errors. For instance, you have said that the fact of virginity excludes the possibility of maternity." Ursus lifted his eyes meekly. "I did not say that. I said the fact of maternity excludes the possibility of virginity." Minos was thoughtful and mumbled, "True. That is the contrary." It was really the same thing, but Ursus had parried the first blow. Minos, meditating on the answer just given by Ursus, sank into the depths of his own imbecility and kept silent. The overseer of history, or, as Ursus called him, Rhadamanthus, covered the retreat of Minos by this interpolation. "Accused, your audacity and your errors are of 2 sorts. You have denied that the battle of Pharsalia would have been lost because Brutus and Cassius had met." "I said," murmured Ursus, "that there was something in the fact that Caesar was a better captain." The man of history passed, without transition, to mythology. "You have accused the infamous acts of Acton." "I think," said Ursus, insinuatingly, "that a man is not dishonored by having seen a naked woman." "Then you are wrong," said the judge severely. Rhadamanthus returned to history. "Apropos of the accidents which happened to the cavalry of Mithridates, you have contested the virtues of herbs and plants. You have denied that a herb, like a securiduca, could make the shoes of horses fall off." "Pardon me," replied Ursus. "I said that the power existed only in the herb Sphera cavallo. I never denied the virtue of any herb." And he added in a low voice, "nor of any woman." By this extraneous addition to his answer, Ursus proved to himself that, anxious as he was not disheartened. Ursus was a compound of terror and presence of mind. "To continue," resumed Rhadamanthus, "you have declared that it was folly in Scipio, when he wished to open the gates of Carthage, to use as a key the herb Aethiopus, because the herb Aethiopus has not the property of breaking locks." "I merely said that he would have done better to have used the herb Lunaria." "That is a matter of opinion," murmured Rhadamanthus, touched in his turn. And the man of history was silent. The theologian, Minos, having returned to consciousness, questioned Ursus anew. He had had time to consult his notes. "You have classed orpiment amongst the products of arsenic, and you have said that it is poison. The Bible denies this." "The Bible denies, but arsenic affirms it," sighed Ursus. The man whom Ursus called Achis, and who was the envy of medicine, had not yet spoken, but now, looking down on Ursus, was proudly half-closed eyes. He said, "The answer is not without some show of reason." Ursus thanked him with his most cringing smile. Minos frowned frightfully. "I resume," said Minos. "You have said that it is false that the basilisk is the king of serpents, under the name of cockatrice." "Yes, very reverend sir," said Ursus. "So little did I desire to insult the basilisk that I have given out as certain that it is a man's head." "Be it so," replied Minos severely. But you added that Boreas had seen one with the head of a falcon. Can you prove it? Not easily, said Ursus. Here he had lost a little ground. Minos, seizing the advantage, pushed it. You have said that a converted Jewish person has not a nice smell. Oh. Yes, but I added that a Christian who becomes Jewish has a nasty one. What? Distasteful. Minos lost his eyes over the accusing documents. You have affirmed and propagated things which are impossible. You have said that Elian has seen an elephant write sentences. Nay, very reverend gentlemen, I simply said that Opian had heard a hippopotamus discuss a philosophical problem. You have declared that it is not true that a dish made a beechwood will become covered of itself with all the viands that one can desire. I said that if it is virtue, that if it has this virtue, it must be that you received it from the devil. That I received it. No, most reverend sir, nobody, everybody. Aside, Ursus thought, I don't know what I am saying. But his outward confusion, though extreme, was not distinctly visible. Ursus struggled with it. All this, Mino began again, implies a certain belief in the devil. Ursus held his own. Very reverend sir, I am not an unbeliever with regard to the devil. Belief in the devil is the reverse side of faith in God. The one proves the other. He who does not believe a little in the devil does not believe much in God. He who believes in the sun must believe in the shadow. The devil is the night of God. What is night? The proof of day. Ursus here extemporized a fathomless combination of philosophy and religion. Minos remained pensive and relapsed into silence. Ursus breathed afresh. A sharp onslaught now took place. Achis, the medical delegate who had disdainfully protected Ursus against the theologian, now turned suddenly from auxiliary into assailant. He placed his closed fist on his bundle of papers, which was large and heavy. Ursus received this apostrophe full of the breast. It is proved that crystal is sublimated ice, and that the diamond is sublimated crystal. It is averred that ice becomes crystal in 1,000 years, and crystal diamond in 1,000 ages. You have denied this. Nay, replied Ursus with sadness. I only said that in 1,000 years ice had time to melt, and that 1,000 ages were difficult to count. The examination went on. Questions and answers clashed like swords. You have denied that plants can talk. Not at all. But to do so, they must grow under a gibbet. Do you own that the mandragora cries? No, but it sings. You have denied that the fourth finger of the left hand is a cordial virtue. I only said that to sneeze to the left was a bad sign. You have spoken rashly and disrespectfully of the phoenix. Learned judge, I merely said that when he wrote that the brain of the phoenix was a delicate morsel, but that it produces headaches, Plutarch was a little out of his reckoning, inasmuch as the phoenix never existed. A detestable speech. A cinnamulker, which makes its nest with sticks of cinnamon, the ringtacus that Paristus called in the manufacture of his poisons, the Menucodietus, which is the bird of paradise, and the Seminda, which has a threefold beak, has been mistaken for the phoenix, but the phoenix has existed. I do not deny it. You are a stupid ass. I desire to be thought no better. You have confessed that the elder tree cures the quinsy, but you added that it was not because it has in its roots a fairy excrescence. I said it was because Judas hung himself on an elder tree. A plausible opinion, growled the theologian, glad to strike his little blow. Arrogance repulsed soon turns to anger. Wandering, Mountebank, you wander inasmuch as with your feet your tendencies are out of the way and suspicious. You approach the bounds of sorcery. You have dealings with unknown animals. You speak to the populace of things that exist, but for you alone, and the nature of which is unknown. Such is the Homora House? This repartee produced a certain disorder in the irritated science of Dr. Akis. Ursus added, the existence of the Homoras is quite as true as that of the odoriferous hyena and of the civet described by Castulus. Akis got out of the difficulty by charging home. Here are your own words, and very diabolical words they are. Listen. With his eyes on his notes, Akis read, 2 plants, the phalagsigil and the aglyphotis, are luminous in the evening, flowers by day, stars by night. And looking unsteadily at Ursus, what have you to say to that? Ursus answered, every plant is a lamp. Its perfume is its light. Akis turned over other pages. You have denied that the vesicles of the otter are equivalent to castoreum. I merely said that perhaps it may be necessary to receive the teachings of Atis on this point with some reserve. Agis became furious. You practice medicine? I practice medicine, sighed Ursus timidly. On living things? Rather than on dead ones, said Ursus. Ursus defended himself stoutly, but dully, an admirable mixture in which meekness predominated. He spoke with such gentleness that Dr. Akis felt that he must insult him. What are you murmuring there? He asked rudely. Ursus was amazed, and restricted himself to saying, murmurings are for the young, and moans for the aged. Alas, I moan. Akis replied, be assured of this. If you attend a sick person and he dies, you will be punished by death. Ursus hazarded a question. And if he gets well? In that case, said the doctor, softening his voice, you will be punished by death. There is little difference, said Ursus. The doctor replied, if death ensues, we punish gross ignorance. If recovery, we punish presumption. The gibbet in either case. I was ignorant of the circumstances, murmured Ursus. I thank you for teaching me. One does not know all the beauties of the law. Take care of yourself. Religiously, said Ursus. We know what you are about. As for me, thought Ursus, that is more than I always know myself. We could send you to prison. I see that perfectly, gentlemen. You cannot deny your infractions nor your encroachments. My philosophy asks pardon. Great audacity has been attributed to you. That is quite a mistake. It is said that you have cured the sick. I am the victim of calumny. The 3 pairs of eyebrows, which were so horribly fixed on Ursus, contracted. The 3 wise faces drew near each other and whispered. Ursus had the vision of a vague fool's cap stretched out above those 3 empowered heads. The low and requisite whispering of the trio was of some minutes' duration, during which time Ursus felt all the ice and all the scorch of agony. At length Minos, who was president, turned to him and said angrily, Go away. Ursus felt something like Jonas as he was leaving the belly of the whale. Minos continued, You are discharged. Ursus said to himself, They won't catch me at all. They won't catch me at this again. Goodbye, medicine. And he added in his innermost heart, From henceforth I will carefully allow them to die. Bent double, he bowed everywhere. To the doctors, to the busts, to the tables, to the walls, and retiring backwards through the door, disappeared almost as a shadow melting into air. He left the hall slowly, like an innocent man, and rushed from the street rapidly, like a guilty one. The officers of justice are so singular and obscure in their ways that even when acquitted, one flies from them. As he fled, he mumbled, I am well out of it. I am the savant untamed. They say the savant civilized. Doctors cavil at the learned. False science is the excrement of the true, and is employed to the destruction of philosophers. Philosophers, as they produce sophists, produce their own scourge. Of the dung of the thrush is born the mistletoe, with which is made birdlime, with which the thrush is captured. Turdus sibi malum cacat. We do not represent Ursus as a refined man. He was imprudent enough to use words which expressed his thoughts. He had no more taste than Voltaire. When Ursus returned to the Green Box, he told Master Nicholas that he had been delayed by following a pretty woman, and not let word escape him concerning his adventure, except in the evening, when he said in a low voice to Homo, "See here, I have vanquished the 3 heads of Cerberus." End of chapter 6. All right, so Ursus did have to defend himself, and there were a lot of claims, not about his wolf, but about a lot of claims that he's had. And so he's defending the things that he said, and he's like, well, actually, I said this. And he's like, well, yeah, that's true. And he, like, sometimes lying, sometimes just fixing or making clear what he actually said. And then they find out that he also practices medicine, which they're like, okay, but we're gonna kill you. Either way, basically. Either you help somebody and they die, or no, you treat somebody and they die, we kill you. You treat somebody and they get well, we still kill you. So that's cool. And he leaves and he doesn't tell anybody about it except for his wolf friend. And I think that's where we're going to leave tonight. Now, I hope you all have a great rest of your night. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. Thank you all so much for being here. I will see you very soon.